In the background, you can see the Victory Bell. You can also see Taylor Hall. And you can see Blanket Hill, at which time the students will be pushed up when the Guard begins the march. And General Canterbury and General Del Corso started the march against the students who were assembled at the Victory Bell. Many students were coming over Blanket Hill on their way to the Student Union, where many would be having lunch. But unfortunately, the National Guardsmen, especially the authorities in charge, assumed that those students were joining the demonstration. There were about 1,000 people on the college common here at Kent State on May the 4th, some of whom were protesting the war, many of whom were there because they were protesting the National Guards on campus.
I was a faculty marshal that day. I was a young faculty member, as the journalists like to say. I was 33, but was fairly close to the activist students, and so I helped organize the faculty marshals, and the whole weekend I was a faculty marshal.
And heard initially over the radio that guardsmen had been killed on campus. That's how chaotic it was, and nobody knew what had really happened. The local newspaper printed that headline, "Guardsmen shot on campus."
Well, I heard one or two gunshots, and I turned and started to run, and I didn't get really more than a step or two, and a bullet entered my left foot and knocked me off my feet, so I was actually lying on the ground.
What you had was the beginning of the demonstration, and at that time it was very obvious to the National Guard that the protest that they had assumed was going to take place was actually beginning. This is a very important part of the march, because as people reached the top of the hill, most people assumed that this is where the Guard would stop. The commons had been cleared. There was no reason to continue. As they continued the march, some students that were left were in the parking lot over to the left. What you can see now in those areas that are marked out are areas where, in the 13 seconds of gunfire, the 61 rounds were fired. These are where the students actually were killed. Analysis has shown that this bullet hole came from the National Guard weapons as they were being fired into the parking lot.
I would say that one of the problems we had in the 70s is that it was the activism was generated by a reaction to a perceived threat or a real threat, but it wasn't a proactive move on the part of an enraged citizenry. And that's the problem, that neither in the 70s nor today did we have an enraged citizenry, a citizenry that was rising up in defense of the Constitution of the United States of America. I just think that there's a huge disconnect between the ideals and values that define who we are as a nation and the manner in which we go about living our lives. We don't function as citizens. We function as consumers. We function as entities that have no linkage with that which supposedly defines us.
One thing about Kent that I noticed, it's a good way to politicize people, students who would not necessarily be political, but because they can identify with the students because they are the same age, it really does. It's sort of a kickoff for some people's political life.
So Jeff was the closest one who was shot and killed. You can see the distance. Once again, I would ask those people who say the lives of the Guard were endangered, stand here, come to Kent, pick up any rock you would like, and try to do bodily injury to someone at the top of the hill who has an M1 bayonet enclosed weapon. There were reports that National Guardsmen had been injured, so the ambulance initially did not pick up Bill Schroeder, and instead started looking for National Guardsmen. Subsequently, Bill Schroeder bled to death as he was awaiting attention here at Kent State in 1970. This is where Sandy Schroyer, who was going to a communication disorders class where she had an exam on the larynx, was crossing the commons, crossing this parking lot, having seen the Guard retreat back over the commons. She had not been involved at all that weekend, and suddenly she decided she could cross this area after the Guard had receded down the hill. Sandy, as she was walking back, according to her friend, so they heard a volley of rounds. She started to turn around, and a bullet ripped through the larynx, which was actually what the test was about, and she was killed instantly.
students, anybody who was here in 1970, oftentimes they don't want to talk about it. It's the same as folks that were in a situation, a traumatic situation. They just kind of push it down and don't want to deal with it. So from that point on, we were actively involved in the preservation of the May 4th site and now Visitor Center, which we're very excited about. We are both involved in the 30th commemoration, so we've come more into the establishment in trying to get things done.
It's not something that's in my everyday life. Obviously the wheelchair's there and all that stuff, but I'm just like anybody else. I wake up in the morning and thank God to see another day, put my pants on and go to work just like all the rest of us. We all do. And it's real important to just keep moving and be involved and do your work.
A lot of students still to this day don't know what happened at Kent State.
The Justice Department summary said there was no sniper, there was no reason to fire, they had ample tear gas supply, they could have used bayoneting. And I think for those of you who've been wondering for the last 38 years what occurred at Kent State, I'm hoping that this visual description is smart and from the Guard's perspective gives you a better idea of the challenge to the American conscience of what Kent State still poses today.